He disappeared without a trace. When he returned, nothing could have prepared me for what followed. My name is Evan Granger. I'm 32. I live in a quiet suburb outside of Portland, and until 7 years ago, I had a younger brother named Caleb. He was 19 when he vanished. No note, no phone call, no signs of a struggle. He just didn't come home one night. The police were useless. Probably ran off, they said. But I knew Caleb. He was erratic, sure. A dreamer. But not the kind to leave without saying goodbye. Mom died 2 years after his disappearance. Brief, mostly. She refused to move his things. His room remained untouched, a museum of his absence. Dad drank himself in Jacuma every other night, muttering things like he saw something and it's not natural. I chalked it up to madness. And then, on a suffocatingly hot July evening, Caleb returned. I found him on my porch shirtless, barefoot, caked in dirt and blood. His eyes were glassy, but locked on mine like a man remembering what reality feels like. Evan, he whispered before collapsing. At the hospital, they ran every test imaginable. No drugs. No alcohol. Malnourished. Dozens of old scars across his back and legs. He wouldn't say where he'd been. Not to me. Not to the doctors. Not even to Dad, who sobered up long enough to scream at him for answers. But late that night, Caleb snuck into my room at the hospital. "They're listening," he said. His voice was a shredded whisper, trembling with something deeper than fear, something primal. "I need you to come with me. There are things I have to show you, but we only have 3 days." "Who's listening?" I asked. He only smiled the grim, broken thing. "They're not human," he said. "Not really, but they wear our skin." I thought he'd lost his mind. I wanted to believe that. But when I got home, my front door was wide open. Someone or something had been inside. And there were claw marks on my bedroom wall. The next few days were a blur. Caleb was in and out of his strange, feverish state, but when he was lucid, he told me things that made my blood run cold. He would never make eye contact, though, always staring at his hands on the floor as if whatever was inside him might escape if he looked up. "They've been following me, Evan," he whispered, voice hoarse. "Since the night I left, they've been mimicking." At first, I thought it was the result of trauma. After all, 7 years is a long time to vanish without a trace. But his eyes, those eyes, haunted and hollower, as if he had seen the world unraveling, were enough to keep me from dismissing his words entirely. The more Caleb spoke, the more I started to question my own reality. He described strange encounters, whispered voices in the dark, and places that didn't exist on any map. But the most disturbing thing he said was when he looked me dead in the eye and said, "They're coming for you next." I didn't want to believe him. I didn't want to live in a world where things wore human skins and followed people like prey. But then things started happening. The house felt wrong. It was subtle at first, like a feeling you get when you're being watched, a cold prickle down your spine when you think no one is around. But it quickly escalated. One night, after Caleb had fallen asleep in the living room, I went to the kitchen to grab some water. And that's when I heard a low, rasping voice coming from the hallway. It was soft, like someone trying to whisper but failing. I froze. The voice didn't belong to Caleb. It sounded wrong somehow. It repeated the same sentence over and over, a phrase I couldn't make sense of until I finally summoned the courage to creep closer. The words became clearer, colder. "Don't trust him, Evan. He's not your brother." My heart hammered in my chest. I turned around and there was Caleb standing in the doorway. But his eyes, they were completely black. No white. No iris. Just a solid void where his pupils should have been. I staggered back, gasping for air. "Caleb?" I whispered, voice trembling. His lips twisted into a smile that wasn't his. "You don't believe me yet, do you?" I stumbled away from him, eyes glued to those empty sockets. My breath came in ragged bursts as I backed into the wall. And then, just as suddenly as it had happened, his eyes returned to normal. He blinked once, twice, and his features softened. The moment had passed. But the room felt different, like a layer of reality had been peeled back, exposing something dark underneath. "I'm sorry, Evan," Caleb said, his voice thick with regret. "I'm trying to protect you, but we're running out of time." I barely heard him. All I could think about was the voice, the one that wasn't his, and the warning it had given. By the time I left the kitchen, the entire house felt suffocating. Something was lurking, something not quite human. And it was waiting. The next morning, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone in the house. Every creak of the floorboards sent my heart into overdrive, and every gust of wind outside felt like a whisper at my back. Caleb was silent all through breakfast, picking at his food while his gaze lingered on the door, like he was waiting for someone to walk through it. I didn't ask who, but the air between us was thick with unspoken words. I didn't know what to do. The logical part of me said that Caleb was still just a traumatized, lost soul, someone who had gone through hell and come back broken. But the part of me that remembered those eyes, the void where people should have been, was too scared to ignore the possibility that something more sinister was happening. And when Caleb caught me staring at him, he gave me a grim smile. "You saw it last night," he said quietly. His voice trembled, as if he wasn't sure whether to speak or stay silent. It's not just the eyes, Evan. They take us. They twist us into something else. I felt my throat tighten. What are you talking about, Caleb? He turned his head away, eyes darting nervously around the room. I don't know how to explain this, but there's something in the woods, something old, that's been hunting us for generations, the thing that's been following me, it... A loud banging on the door interrupted him. Both of us froze. There was no mistaking it. The sound was heavy, deliberate, and sharp. I stood up slowly, my heart pounding. Caleb's expression shifted, his face paling as the colour drained from his skin. He looked terrified, more so than I'd ever seen him. No, he whispered, backing away from the door. It's them. I didn't wait. I rushed to the door, my hand shaking as I gripped the handle. When I pulled it open, I found no one. Just an empty street. The wind whistled softly, carrying the smell of something rotten in the air. But that wasn't the most disturbing part. On the doorstep was a single black feather. It was unnaturally large, too thick for crows, and when I picked it up, it felt cold, like it had been frozen for years. Khaled's voice cracked from behind me. They've marked you now. I turned to face him, but what I saw made my blood run cold. Khaled's face was no longer just pale. It was hollow, gaunt. His eyes were open wide, but there was nothing behind them, just a void. His lips moved, but no sound came out. I saw the corners of his mouth twitch as though he were trying to speak, but he couldn't. That's when I noticed something else. The same black feather from outside had appeared in his hand. He looked down at it, horrified. They found me again, he whispered, voice breaking. They found us both. Before I could say anything, he staggered back, clutching his chest. His breath came in rapid, shallow bursts, like he was suffocating. His eyes flickered, changing from black to a deep, a natural green, and I could see his pupils constricting, as though something inside him was fighting to break free. Evan, listen to me, he gasped. You can't stay here, you have to leave now. But the moment I took a step toward him, I heard a sound behind me. It was faint at first, like a whisper of wind, but it grew louder. And then I saw it, a shadow moving in the corner of my eye, like something was creeping just beyond the edge of my vision. I spun around, but there was nothing there, except the door to the basement was slowly creaking open on its own. Caleb's eyes widened in fear, and before I could stop him, he bolted toward the door, his legs shaking beneath him. Hush! I shouted, grabbing his arm. You're not going down there, we need to get out of here. But he looked at me, his expression hollow and desperate. I'm not safe here, Evan, none of us are. And then he pulled me toward the basement door. The moment Caleb pulled me toward the basement, the temperature in the house seemed to plummet. My breath came out in visible clouds as I stepped onto the creaky stairs, and the floor beneath me groaned under the weight of each step. I glanced back at the door, but the world outside was starting to feel far away, like it belonged to another reality. Caleb, I said, trying to sound calm, though my voice trembled. What is this? Why do you want to go down there? His grip on my wrist tightened. I have to show you, they're down there, the ones who have been following me. I tried to pull away, but Caleb's grip was ironclad. I couldn't understand what was happening. My brother, who had been lost for 7 years, was acting like a stranger. But the urgency in his eyes told me that something deep inside him was terrified of what lay below. The stairs led into a narrow, suffocating hallway. The air down here was thick with dust, stale and heavy. The walls were lined with old, faded photographs, family pictures, old and yellowed with time. But they weren't the pictures I remembered. They had been altered, scratched and warped in places. Faces were blurred out, except for Caleb's, which remained untouched. This is where it all started, Caleb muttered, more to himself than to me. This is where the door opened. I followed him deeper into the basement, but something didn't feel right. It was too quiet. The usual hum of the house events, the refrigerator was absent. All I could hear was the sound of my own heartbeat in my ears and the occasional creak of the wooden floor beneath us. And then, at the end of the hallway, I saw it. A door. Old, wooden, and scarred. But it wasn't like the other doors in the house. It looked wrong. It was smaller than the others, barely big enough for a person to pass through. Its wood was darkened, almost black, as if it had been burned, but not by fire. And the air around it felt off. A tangible unease seemed to radiate from the crack beneath the door, as if something was trying to get out. Caleb stood in front of it, his hand hovering above the doorknob, but he didn't move. His face was pale, his lips trembling as if he were fighting the urge to step away. Caleb, I said, my voice barely a whisper. What's behind that door? His voice broke, barely audible. Everything I've told you is nothing compared to what's behind that door. They live there, and if we don't stop them... He trailed off, looking down at his feet as if the weight of what he was about to say was too much. But I could see the fear in his eyes. I could hear the tremor in his voice. We'll all become like them, he finished, his words falling into the silence like stones in a deep well. I didn't understand. I couldn't. But that fear, it was so real, so raw. And in that moment, I didn't want to know what was behind that door. But Caleb had already made his choice. Before I could stop him, he yanked the door open, revealing a room swallowed by darkness. The air grew even colder. The room was impossible to see, as if it existed in a space outside of time itself. My eyes were straining to make out anything, but there was nothing to see except shadows, and they seemed to move shifting, riding like smoke, but thick and solid. Caleb stepped inside, his movements mechanical, as if he had no choice but to obey. I tried to pull him back, but he was already too far in. The moment he crossed the threshold, the door slammed shut behind him with a deafening crack. I stood frozen, my body screaming at me to run, to get out of the house and never look back. But my brother was trapped in that room. The last thing I heard before the door sealed shut was his voice, distant but unmistakable. "Evan, you have to come in. It's the only way to stop them." And that was when I realized that whatever Caleb had seen, whatever had followed him for 7 years, was no longer just hunting him. It was hunting us both. And I had no idea how to stop it. I stood frozen for what felt like an eternity, my hand still gripping the cold, brass doorknob. I could hear Caleb's voice faintly from behind the door, his words muffled and distant, but the urgency in them was unmistakable. "Come in, Evan." His voice cracked with a desperation I had never heard before. "If you don't, they'll take you too. It's the only way to stop them." My heart pounded in my chest, each beat ringing in my ears like a death knell. Part of me wanted to run out of the house and never look back. But the other part, the part that still believed in the brother I grew up with, told me to go in. Maybe I could save him. I pushed the door open, the hinges groaning in protest, and stepped inside. The darkness swallowed me whole. It was like stepping into another world, one where light didn't exist, where shadows moved with a life of their own. I reached up, my hand brushing the wall, but there was no solid surface. The room felt alive, like it was shifting and breathing around me. "Caleb." My voice echoed, swallowed by the vast emptiness. I couldn't see anything. Not a single shape or form. It was as if the air itself had turned to black ink, pressing against my skin. Then I heard a soft, rasping breath from somewhere in the dark. It wasn't Caleb's. It was wrong. My skin prickled, the hairs on my neck standing on end. I turned in every direction, trying to locate the source of the sound, but the room remained a void. The pressure around me increased, suffocating, and my panic grew. Suddenly, I felt something cold and wet brush against my cheek. I spun around, but there was nothing there. My mind raced to know, I'm not losing it. This is real. I need to find Caleb. I need to get out of here. I took a few shaky steps forward, each movement hesitant and sure. And then, just as my foot landed on what felt like solid ground, the air seemed to snap. The shadows swirled violently around me, and I saw it. A figure, a distorted version of Caleb, standing at the center of the room. His body was bent unnaturally, his limbs twisting in ways that made no sense. His facial was wrong. His skin was stretched too tight, his features too sharp, his eyes. Their eyes. They were hollow, like deep black pits. But they didn't just lack pupils. They swallowed light. There was no depth. No soul. Just an empty void that reached into the core of my being. "Evan," the figure whispered, but the voice that came from Caleb's mouth was not Caleb's at all. It was a rasping, guttural sound, as if the words were being pulled from somewhere deep inside a dying animal. I spoke again, but this time it was different. The voice was in my head, not coming from Caleb's mouth. "You should have stayed out. You should have stayed away from the door. It's too late now." My heart stopped. That wasn't Caleb. It couldn't be. This thing in his skin, wasn't my brother. And yet, there it stood, using his voice, his form, to deceive me. I stepped backward, my body trembling with terror. But then I felt something cold and wet on my feet, and I looked down. My stomach twisted into knots as I saw what it was. The floor was covered in a slick, black substance, oozing up from the cracks in the stone, like oil or blood. The figure began to move toward me, its distorted limbs dragging against the floor. As it came closer, the air grew colder, and I could hear the low, guttural growl of something deeper, something older inside the thing wearing Caleb's skin. I had no choice. I turned and ran, my heart racing, but the shadows pressing around me, trapping me, pushing me toward the walls. Every turn I made seemed to lead me deeper into the blackness. I had no idea how far I had gone. I couldn't see, couldn't breathe, couldn't think straight. All I could do was run. Then, just as the creature reached out to grab me, the lights flickered back on. I blinked disoriented as the room around me slowly came into focus. And there, standing in the corner, was Caleb. His eyes were normal again. He was breathing heavily, his hands shaking as he stared at me. "Evan," he said, his voice strained, "you need to get out, now." But his words felt wrong. I could see it in his eyes. They weren't the eyes of the brother I once knew. And it wasn't him telling me to leave. I turned and ran without thinking, my feet pounding against the floor, desperate to escape. But the moment I reached the door, it slammed shut. The lock clicked. I was trapped. And then I heard the voice again, the thing that wasn't Caleb. "You should have listened. There's no way out, Evan, not for you." The room began to shift around me again, and the shadows closed in, darker and darker. I couldn't breathe. The air around me was thick, suffocating. Every second felt like I was drowning in a sea of darkness. The wall seemed to pulse with an unnatural rhythm, like a heartbeat, like the house itself was alive and it was watching me. There was no way to escape. The door had sealed shut with an eerie finality, and the lock clicked again, as if to mock me. I backed away from it, my pulse thundering in my ears. Sweat was pouring down my face, and I was trembling, not from the cold, but from something much deeper, something primal that told me I wasn't alone in this room. I could feel the eyes on me. The eyes that weren't Caleb's, the ones that followed me in the shadows. I turned around, searching for a way out, but the room had transformed. What had once been a small, cramped space now stretched endlessly before me, a maze of winding corridors and shifting walls. The door I had tried to escape through was now gone, replaced by a solid wall of darkness that seemed to absorb any light I dared to shine on it. They were here. Something in the air, some presence that I couldn't see but could feel, was haunting me. And I knew, deep down, that it wouldn't stop until I was taken just like Caleb had been. Just like everyone else. I took a step forward, my eyes darting around the room. But every time I moved, the walls seemed to shift. I wasn't just trapped in a room. I was trapped in a nightmare. The walls closed in, and the floor seemed to tilt, warping at impossible angles. No matter where I went, I was always back at the same spot. Then I heard it. A low hum, like the distant sound of a song I couldn't remember. It echoed through the maze, coming from somewhere deep in the shadows. It was almost melodic, but the tone was wrong. Off-key. Like something pretending to be music, but failing miserably. And then, through the silence, I heard Caleb's voice again, only this time it wasn't desperate or fearful. It was cold. Hollow. "Devin," he called, his voice echoing from all directions. "Come to me, I've waited for you." I spun around, trying to locate him, but all I saw was blackness. "You are not my brother," I shouted into the void, my voice cracking. "You are not Caleb." Laughter cold and hollow rang through the air, vibrating the walls. The sound came from everywhere and nowhere at once, reverberating in my skull. The voice shifted, blending Caleb's tone with something deeper, more ancient. "Does it matter?" the thing said. "He's gone. You should have seen it the moment he stepped into this place. We're all gone now. They are in control. It's too late for you." I felt the walls pressing on me again, pushing me forward, forcing me deeper into the labyrinth. My chest tightened with panic. There was no escape. There was no way out. As I stumbled forward, the darkness seemed to pull at me, pulling me into the shadows, and I could hear it, feel it was moving behind me. It was waiting. I sprinted through the maze, ignoring the disorienting twists and turns, but the more I ran, the farther I seemed to be from anything resembling an exit. The walls seemed to stretch into infinity, and each corridor led to another dead end. There was no way to escape, no way to fight it. I was being hunted, like an animal trapped in a cage, with no chance of escape. And then, just as I felt like I couldn't take another step, I saw a light. Faint and flickering, but it was there. It came from a narrow doorway in the distance. With a new surge of hope, I pushed through the darkness, moving toward the light as fast as I could, my heart pounding with desperate hope. I reached the door, my hands trembling as I grabbed the handle. It was cold, too cold, but I twisted it anyway, and the door opened with a loud groan. Beyond it, I found Caleb, or, at least, what used to be Caleb. He was standing in the center of the room, his back to me. But this time, I could see the truth. His body was hunched into foam, his skin stretched too tight over his bones. His face had been warped, as though someone had pulled and twisted it, creating a grotesque mask of flesh. His eyes, those empty, hollow pits, stared blankly ahead, but I could still feel the presence behind them. The thing that wasn't Caleb. "You shouldn't have come, Evan," it whispered. "Now you belong to us too." I didn't know how, but I knew I had to run. I turned, desperate to escape, but the door behind me slammed shut. I was trapped once again. And as I turned back to face Caleb, or whatever was left of him, I realized something worse than anything I had feared. It was no longer just him in the room. The shadows had formed into shapes, twisted, contorted figures that stepped out from the walls. They moved with purpose, their eyes empty, like Caleb's fixed on me. And they were getting closer. The figures in the shadows moved like liquid, fluid and unnatural, their forms rippling and shifting, constantly changing as though they were made of smoke. Their eyes, those gaping, empty voids, followed my every movement, and the air around me seemed to grow heavier, as if the very atmosphere had become thick with dread. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. My throat felt tight, my chest heavy with the weight of their gaze. And then I realized they weren't just watching me. They were waiting for me to make a choice. Behind me, Caleb, the thing that had been Caleb, remained still, his head tilted in an unnatural angle as though he were observing me like a specimen. His lips curled into a grotesque smile, and his hollow eyes gleamed with malice. "You see," he said, or whatever was speaking through him, "you always had a choice, it's just that you never understood it." I backed away slowly, my hand shaking. I didn't know what I wanted. I didn't know what it was offering. But I couldn't take it anymore. I couldn't let this thing, whatever it was, consume me. Not like Caleb. And then it hit me. This was the choice. The realization crashed over me like a wave. They hadn't just come for Caleb. They had been coming for me, for everyone. They were the predators, the ancient things that fed on the living, on the souls of those they hunted. They wore our skins, twisted our bodies, erased our essence, and left only hollow shells behind. They had been Caleb, and now they wanted me. I had a choice. I could give in. I could let them take me. I could be like Caleb, like them, a creature of shadows and empty eyes, doomed to wander this cursed labyrinth for eternity. But what would that mean? What kind of existence would that be? Well, I could fight. I could choose to resist. I could choose to run. But to do that, I would need to do the unthinkable. I would need to leave Caleb behind, the last shred of humanity I had left. The thing that wore his face and body wasn't him anymore. It couldn't be. And I had to accept that. Erin, the voice hissed, slithering through the air. You can't escape. There is nowhere left to run. You can't fight us. You've already lost. I closed my eyes for a second, taking a deep breath, trying to block out the chilling words. I had no idea how long I'd been down here. I had no idea how long I had until the shadows fully consumed me, until the darkness took me too. But I had one final chance, and I wasn't going to let it slip away. I remembered something I had buried deep in my mind. The basement was the heart of this place. The darkness that had consumed Caleb, that had taken everything he was, had to be anchored somewhere. If I could destroy whatever was holding this world together, I could stop it. I could stop them. Figures in the shadows closed in, their distorted bodies creeping closer. But I didn't flinch. I didn't look away. I reached down to my belt and pulled out the only weapon I had in my father's old pocket knife. It was dull, it was old, and it had no right to be the weapon that could save me. But it was all I had. I plunged it into the nearest figure, watching as it passed straight through it like smoke. The darkness hissed, but the figure didn't recoil. It kept coming. But I didn't stop. I kept slashing, aiming for the heart of the darkness, for the center of the maze. I had to hit something. I had to destroy the anchor that held this place together. And then, as I made another swipe, something strange happened. The darkness recoiled. The air seemed to tremble. The figure near, the thing shrieked, its body collapsing like a heap of dust. I didn't stop. I kept moving, stabbing into the shadows, ignoring the pain and exhaustion that had settled deep into my bones. Every strike made the air feel lighter, the maze less oppressive, as if the very fabric of the nightmare was unraveling. Finally, I heard a sound. A crack. Like the breaking of glass, or the shattering of reality itself. The walls trembled, and the ground beneath me shook. For a moment, I thought the whole place was collapsing. But I didn't look back. I kept running, pushing through the thinning shadows, my heart pounding in my chest. The darkness was receding, the walls were cracking, and the figures that had hunted me seemed to lose their grip on this place. And then, finally, I saw it. A door. An exit. With everything I had left, I sprinted toward it, throwing the door open and stepping out into the light. But when I looked back, I saw Caleb, or what had been Caleb, standing in the doorway, staring at me with those hollow eyes. Don't leave me, Evan, it whispered, the voice broken and empty. We're all the same now, don't leave me behind. I hesitated for a moment, torn. But the door was closing, and I knew what I had to do. I stepped through it, slamming it shut behind me. And as I collapsed to the floor, gasping for air, I realized that I had made my choice. Caleb was lost, and I was the one who had to live with the consequences. But as the door sealed behind me, I couldn't help but wonder, had I really escaped? Or had I just sealed my fate too?